get started. It's 3:46. Hello, and thank you for joining us today for the final breakout session of FormFest 2025. We've been experiencing some really choppy internet, so we hope to be here with you the entire time. But TBD, this will be exciting. Okay. So my name is Rachel. I'm a legal design strategist, and I work on integrating human-centered design into civil court reform and access to justice more broadly. And so for those unfamiliar with civil court governs cases like eviction, family law, debt collection, and estates. And I'll pass it over to Molly.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, everyone. My name is Molly Graham. I'm a design researcher working at the Public Policy Lab, and I've been working on form-related projects for a few years now, and my work brings together, it's like the melding pot of qualitative research and systems thinking to support public systems in improving communications, operations, and just finding ways to support the people that they serve.
And today we are talking about distributing labor in forms through human-centered design. We'll briefly talk about, one, how we think about forms and their purpose. Two, we will review some of the recent academic research on administrative burden that's influencing our thinking about labor distribution, but also about human-centered design and public programs more broadly. And then three, we'll discuss human-centered design and questions for distributing labor on forms. So this talk is truly a reflection of our current musings on the relationship between human-centered design and administrative burden. And we know burden is something that most practitioners are thinking about in some capacity as they do their work. And so as much as we hope that people will come away from this with new thoughts and language around burden and labor distribution on forms, we also just want this to be an invitation to have more conversations around how practitioners are thinking about and measuring burden in their work.
So some of the different projects we're going to be drawing from in this presentation include rental assistance through people-informed design. So that's otherwise known as RAPID. So it's a 2-year partnership that PPL, the Public Policy Lab, had with the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development. And it was to assess how HPD could improve the housing choice voucher experience for tenants, owners, and staff. So it's taking a look at that application. And next, we have the HUD form redesign. That's also known as the National Common Application for Subsidized Housing. And that is another project where PPL created tenant-friendly template forms that comply with new HOTMA requirements that came around this past year. And these templates will be used by local housing authorities to create improved application materials to connect more Americans to affordable housing. So in that project, it's looking at how can we make something that's both very tenant-friendly, but also very staff-friendly to be able to go in and update these different templates to fit different PHA's needs. Next is clear accessible notices. This is also known as A to Z. It's a 1.5 year long project. It's currently ongoing with Arizona's Department of Economic Security. And it's focusing on the modernization of program notices, such as application confirmation, eligibility determinations, and renewal notices sent to members of the public in multiple languages. And finally, there's Rachel's work, which serves as the foundation for our current project together. And that's focusing on conducting user testing of existing and future state court forms to understand how people navigate them, identifying any barriers for completion or comprehension, and informed design decisions that make forms clearer, more accessible, and more responsive to the needs of self-representing litigants. So these are examples of different projects that we'll be pulling from some experiences to bring this presentation to you all. So,
Molly?
hello. I'm going to turn my camera off. I am awesome. And that is what has led us to doing this joint work together. Were you able to hear me, Rachel?
Yeah, we can still hear you, Molly.
Perfect. I'm the person experiencing interesting internet issues. And if I drop, you can find me on ham radio. I'll be on the 2 meter band, where I'll say the rest of my lines. So that is what has led us to doing some joint work together to create a design system for court forms in Michigan's civil court system.
All right, a little bit about how we think about forms. So Molly and I have spent a lot of time discussing the many purposes of forms, and I imagine every practitioner has their own journey in their understanding of the utility of forms. I wanted to share 3 quotes that really informed my understanding of forms from work that I did on user testing landlord-tenant court forms. One user said, "It's easy to understand, but I have no power at all." Another user, when discussing how to file an answer form in court, said, "If they don't say it here on the form, I would not know where to do it because I haven't had to do it before." And the last quote is from a court administrator who was describing the advice she gives to self-represented litigants when they're struggling to complete forms. She says to them, "This form is your way of communicating with the judge." And so what these quotes did for me was change my understanding of how forms functioned, going from thinking of them as administrative tools to seeing them as critical communication tools. And what also became clear through testing was that for many people who are not represented by an attorney, the form might serve as the only source of information or window into the court system, and served as the primary communication tool, not just about the requirements and processes of the court, but also of that person's responsibilities, consequences of not engaging, and next steps in the court process. And then what was especially surprising to me was the way forms had the additional capacity to communicate power dynamics, which left many users wondering how the landlord-tenant process acknowledged and accounted for their experiences in an adversarial process. And so forms basically serve as this tool and mechanism for people to tell their stories and communicate with the judge. So in summary, as a communication tool, what we're thinking about and discovering is that forms can either provide useful information that makes complicated systems more clear and actionable, or can enhance labor for individuals by keeping processes obscured, which requires extra time and effort to understand the processes as a whole. Oops. All right. Research on administrative burden. So as we dive into the idea of labor distribution on forms, we draw on research by Pamela Hurd and Donald Moynihan, who are both professors at the University of Michigan School of Public Policy and co-directors of the Better Government Lab, which is a lab between University of Michigan and Georgetown University. And they evaluate what works in government. So their book, Administrative Burden, it's often been referenced at FormFest, but I'd also like to highlight a more recent article they published on administrative burden in the social safety net, which offers new insights and updated strategies for thinking about burden mitigation and the ways in which these are linked to human-centered design practices. So the ideas that follow reflect on our thinking and understanding of this topic, but I think the research being done on administrative burden is critical to contemplate when doing work in public systems. Prior to doing this kind of work, I spent many years working as a paralegal, helping people maintain public benefits. And when I discovered the administrative burden book, I finally felt like I had found language and sort of a structure to describe what previously felt very chaotic and disorganized to describe to others. So I encourage everyone who's working in this space to follow their work and the new research from their lab. The definition of administrative burden is the experience of policy implementation as onerous. And so this work heavily focuses on implementation tools and the experience of benefit recipients. The administrative burden framework is based on 3 key claims. One, that even small administrative burdens can have large effects. 2, administrative burdens can reinforce and exacerbate inequalities. And 3, that administrative burdens can be policymaking by other means, meaning that burdens imposed during implementation, so through tools like forms, administrative processes, or even interactions with individual frontline staff, can ensure that the intended outcome of a program is not achieved in practice. So there's substantial data to document the ways in which small administrative burdens create large impacts. And for example, one research study found that picking a health insurance plan resulted in a 30% drop in coverage compared to a system that automatically enrolled participants in a plan. So asking someone to do something as seemingly simple as make a choice, a task that in theory seems reasonable and inconsequential, had significant impact when a default option wasn't offered. In another example, data revealed non-compliance with annual income verifications in the total and permanent disability discharge program led to 50% of these discharges being reversed. They had a 3-year window with income monitoring. And that was despite 92% of borrowers being income eligible. So a request, again, that may seem small and infrequent, like an annual request for income verification, can be burdensome in a way that prohibits individuals from receiving a benefit they otherwise qualify for. And then in the last example, between 2016 through 2019, 250,000 children in Tennessee lost healthcare coverage. 67% of those lost coverage due to failure to return the 47-page renewal packet. It's worth noting that some of this loss of coverage was due to people not ever receiving the renewal packet in the mail, but it also highlights how a small sounding and reasonable request like renewing benefits can balloon into a 47-page size packet during implementation. So further, the administrative burden framework outlines costs of burden measured through 3 categories of costs. And before I go over them, I want to give credit to Jae-Young Kim, an assistant professor at UNC and a member of the Better Government Lab, for the way he's characterized these costs in the column that I've labeled participant sentiment. And also noting that this table is my own adaptation and not directly from the administrative burden literature. So to review the costs, learning costs can be defined as the time and effort expended to learn about the program or service, to understand eligibility status and the nature of the benefits, conditions that have to be satisfied, and how to gain access. So another way of thinking about this is to think of a potential beneficiary saying, I want to engage or I want to get this benefit, but I don't know how to. And so this learning cost is essentially measured in time spent on doing all of these tasks. Compliance costs are defined as the time and financial expenses of gathering information and documentation to comply with a program or service requirement. So this could include things like copy fees or legal fees or transportation. Another way of thinking about this is I want to engage or access this benefit, but it's too hard or costly. And this cost can be measured in time and financial expenses. And then third are psychological costs. And so this would be like stigma arising from applying for or participating in a program, loss of autonomy that comes from intrusive administrative supervision, frustration dealing with the learning and compliance costs that we already talked about, or unjust or unnecessary procedures. So another way to frame this is I want to engage, but the experience is too negative. And if the experience is so negative, then potentially the person just saying, I do not want to engage in this program at all. This cost is measured in feelings and emotions. So in knowing that small burdens can lead to big impacts and having a framework for thinking about burdens and costs and ways of measuring them, I am hopefully going to hand it off to Molly. Molly, are you still here?
I am.
Okay.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Awesome. Perfect. All right. Thanks, Rachel. So, thinking about engagement. When Rachel was touching on in the last slide about participant sentiment, I want to engage, but I don't know how. I want to engage, but it's too hard or costly. I want to engage, but the experience is negative, or I don't want to engage. Uh, in these ways, people are being disengaged by these systems and by these forums. So thinking about disengagement, we can know when people disengage, we might know that there's different obstacles and spots of difficulty. So thinking about, like we were talking about with time and financial and psychological burdens, thinking about things like asking invasive questions, asking repetitive questions. Math is a big one. So we know, we can kind of foresee the shapes of these spots of disengagement, but we'll never truly understand why unless we talk with people directly. So this is where human-centered design comes in. With human-centered design, we're using the experiences of people involved as the primary lens for understanding what we're doing. So everything that we create is grounded in these insights from qualitative research, asking who's involved and affected, and designing these forms with them to help these people meet their needs. And that's a really important part, because it's not enough just to simply think about people who are impacted or just talk about and talk with those people who are impacted. As much as possible, we want to design with them. And this is super important when it comes to forms. On the next slide, one of my favorite illustrations of how human-centered design can meaningfully reduce administrative burden comes from our RAPID project. So this was a project that I was working on with the Public Policy Lab, where we set out to redesign the Section 8 housing application in New York City. And in our early research, we discovered that many applicants were struggling to distinguish between sections of the application packet. So for instance, there was a section where people had to fill in information about themselves, and then they had to fill in information about their household. And so often, even when it was marked or explained in instructions, people would repeat themselves in the household list as well. So they would actually duplicate entire information about themselves. And it would lead to a lot of questions of number of people in the household. And one way that we had attempted to solve for this was we decided to rewrite the page titles as questions to be a simple, intuitive prompt meant to clarify what information we are asking for and to guide users through the form. So on paper and even in initial rounds, we were like, great, this solved the problem. We fixed it. But when we began co-designing directly with Section 8 tenants, a really different reality emerged. And these question-based headings, which we thought would be helpful, actually created significant anxiety for applicants. And this was just such such an example of like a very local issue occurring, where we learned that in New York City, leaving any answer blank on a shelter application meant an automatic rejection. So when we were working with folks that had really experienced the shelter system, so many people that are filling out this form, when they saw a question on the page but nowhere to write an answer, many participants were unsure what to do. So we were getting back versions of this form, these like test forms, where people had meticulously written responses into the margins of the titles to avoid filling it out incorrectly. So even these well-intentioned choices could backfire without incorporating these realities of people within these systems. And what seemed like a straightforward improvement using design principles, and one that seemed applicable to other contexts and situations, became a big source of stress here. And it was just another reminder of why human-centered design is an essential part of any administrative burden relief effort. So that brings us into this next section. So through our work, Rachael and I have been thinking about how to incorporate proactive administrative burden thinking in the things that we create. So we pulled together some top questions that we were thinking about in terms of looking at forms and thinking about administrative burden. And we created this fun anagram baker to help you cook up some forms. And these questions serve as a framework for the foundation of a form to be used alongside speaking with different users in a human-centered design context. And I just want to note real quick that when we talk about reducing administrative burden, we're not talking about eliminating all effort. What we're talking about is redistributing the labor and effort equitably. So our goal is to place the weight of that work on people and parts of the system with the most resources and capacity. Typically, this is often staff who have access to technology or institutions, rather than on individuals who might not have those resources or capacity or navigating crises. At the same time, we do want to recognize that there's a balance to strike here, that shifting every task to staff isn't always feasible or sustainable. There's always a thought process that has to happen here for each form. But the aim is to thoughtfully design processes so that the most complex, resource-intensive work happens where it can be handled the most effectively. And the public is only asked to do what only they can do. So, getting into Baker. First with B, bare, what's the bare minimum we need to know? So we are asking this to start from necessity. So we ask ourselves what is truly essential. Then we get into A, asked, what information is being asked. So we are being explicit about the purpose of each question to ensure it's relevant and meaningful. As a rule of thumb, if we can't explain why we're asking for something, it's a sign that it may not belong. That comes up so often, more often than people would think when parsing through these forms. K is no. So what do we already know without asking the applicant? Many forms duplicate information that are either already known or already on the form itself. E is easier. What could we access more easily than the applicant? So this question shifts the burden from individuals to the systems at hand. So if an agency can more easily verify or gather certain information, in most cases they should, rather than requiring people to track it down themselves. R is remove. So if you had to remove one question, what would it be? This is a really fun exercise because it helps us prioritize and examine every question's value and eliminating those that don't directly serve the form's purpose. This one's always fun to look at on forms because I find that most of the time there is at least one question you could remove. And it's maybe a fun exercise to do with forms that you have in your world. So this series of questions also helps us peel back layers that accumulate on forms over time. Rachel and I have often mused that forms are like monuments to time. they bear like these traces of past priorities and outdated policies and institutional anxieties. You can see all these different layers of patchwork systems and questions that in response to moments that may no longer be relevant. So like imagining fears of fraud from decades ago, requirements that no longer exist, information that was once needed for manual processes that's now automated. So by interrogating each element of a form through this Baker framework, we're able to see what's truly necessary and start to dismantle what no longer serves the public or the people administering these systems. So who do we speak with? When we're talking with people, where do we begin? When we're working on a forms project with a specific eye towards administrative burden, we start by talking to the people most directly impacted. So that means, first and foremost, speaking with form users. So these are the people who have to interpret the forms, complete them, submit them. And in our case, for our project, these are people who are often without legal representation or specialized knowledge. We also look to speak with frontline staff. So these are the people who are interacting with form users day to day, who help them complete forms, who help folks answer questions, and often act as translators of institutional language. What's great about frontline staff is they offer a really valuable perspective on where users get stuck, but also how staff workflow is driven or impacted by these forms. Something about where it gets a little fun with administrative burden and interesting is that when we talk about it, we do focus so much on form users, but burden can and does have a great impact on the immediate staff that interact with these forms. So we came up with some questions. These are some questions we're pulling from old discussion guides that we've used in the past when we're talking about forms, and we're trying to understand administrative burden in forms. So when we're talking with form users, We are asking folks to walk us through the time it took from seeing the form to submitting it, trying to understand how much time it took to collect documents, if they had to stop what they were doing at any point to figure something out before they could keep going, marking where those stopping points were. One of my favorites is, what information do you wish was explained or present on this form? And I also love hearing about what the process of completing the form felt like. It was always an interesting measure whenever we would ask this question and see with different iterations of forms, maybe how the feelings for people changed over time. So we can go to the next one. And we also have some for form frontline staff. And here it's, we are looking at form frontline staff. Ooh, I just got a little internet blip. Okay, we're back. So these are questions that we like to ask to form frontline staff. I love to hear what are the most misunderstandings or common mistakes people make when filling out the form, learning if there's particular user groups who seem to struggle more than others. I love to find out if there's existing instructions or help materials they're giving to people who are struggling, because it really points to where in these forms or in these processes that people are running into obstacles the most. So whether that's collecting documentation, maybe it's instructions on how to get documentation without having to spend money, where to make copies, things like that exist in many various formats, I should say. I'm just always got forms on the mind. So on our next slide, I wanted to look back at this slide again that Rachel had shared earlier. So when we're approaching forms and we're approaching them as conversations, the questions that we ask are shifting from design conventions of like, how do we make this shorter? How do we make it look better? And our questions are shifting to, what are we saying here and how will it be heard? So in the beginning, Rachel was sharing how forms are a system that speaks to the public and how that's often the only way a person can speak back. And thinking about the work that we're doing now, for many navigating courts or services without representation, a form might be their sole source of information about what's expected, what's at stake, and what comes next. So it's this space where they explain their situation and they're participating in decisions about their own lives. So by talking with people and designing with them, we're ensuring that the systems we build don't just work better on paper, they work better for the people that they're meant to serve. And that's at the heart of human-centered design. And it's how we ourselves become part of this conversation of forms. So thank you all for joining us. Rachel, do you have any parting words?
No parting words, but I haven't looked at the questions, if there's any questions. I'm just glad you're still with us, and nice to see your face, Molly.
I thought I'd pop on right at the end.
Okay, we got a question.
Yeah. Did you have any issues with the Paperwork Reduction Act and preventing you from speaking to end users? No, we did not.
That's on all your projects, Molly?
Yeah, that has never been an issue for us from speaking to end users. Usually speaking to end users, we are mostly working within the organization themselves. So I remember within the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development, we were working with them. But no, we didn't run into anything with the Paperwork Reduction Act.
Anything else in the chat? Maybe I should look at the chat. Although I know, Ashley, you're on it, aren't you? Let me see.
Yes, hi. I'm here in the background.
We ended a little early, so if there's no questions, I don't know if there's questions.
Yeah, it looks like there was, oh, here's another question that just came in. I'm going to display it for y'all.
I am curious to hear more about the concept of explaining to users why we are asking for the information. How is that from overwhelming users. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I can think of a specific example for this, also from the Rapid project, but it is a common question on a lot of PHA forums, is applicants are asked if they are currently pregnant, and there's no explanation of why they're being asked this question. And to a lot of people, it feels very invasive, and it is a psychological burden. It could feel shameful to people to have to think about handing over this very personal information to an organization. So we had added an explanation text within the Section 8 application to explain that this is being asked because we want to know if you're eligible for an extra bedroom. So we can explain like there's a benefit to this answer, and this is how you benefit from it. So people might understand more of the stakes and where that applies.
Yeah, and I think this is where the administrative burden framework and maybe their research as well can be useful. Is like, are there things that kind of ignite larger psychological costs of stigma or fear? And if there's evidence for that on specific questions, then those would be questions that I think would, it'd be better placed to spend time explaining those. I think in legal forms, we have a lot of trouble of like what information is too much information because there's so much information. And so, yeah, it's just constantly a balancing act. But I think looking at, what kind of questions lead to more stigma, lead to more fear, and adding explainers to those specifically.
I wanted to hop back real quick because I know that Nina had mentioned the federal government with the Paperwork Reduction Act, and Christina had said it applies to federal agencies, not to forums and research happening at the state city level. I just wanted to address, because I know I talked in the beginning about there being a HUD templating project that PPL was working on. So that project was based off of the results and the qualitative research that we did with the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development. I say the full title every time, that's a mouthful. So that was built from that project. So that's how we had this kind of like wealth of knowledge, because these forums had been done for New York City, and we focused a lot of time on understanding how staff were interacting with these from a templating perspective.
And also, thank you for answering that question, because I didn't know specifically which it governed. So thanks for clarifying that.
Everyone's dropping great knowledge down here about the Paperwork Reduction Act.
Have you? Oh,
you go, Rachel.
Have you run into instances when frontline staff and form users have conflicting priorities? If so, how do you reconcile the differences? Ooh, that's a good question.
That is a good question. I would say in my experience, the conflicting priorities, I would say it's mostly of the burden of who's doing what when. I find this a lot when it comes to math. But what's interesting is that most of the time when math happens on a forum, the staff are checking the math anyways with their calculators at hand. So that's one example where there was a kind of a question of who should be doing this math and where. And sometimes the answer might be a tool to make it easier for staff, because the staff have a computer right there. So it's a question of, if I have this calculator tool right here, or this equation right here, you can pull up this file where they can put the information in and it spits out the answer easier. But it's always a balancing act. I think another one is where it comes to feelings of like fraud is a common fear I find in a lot of agencies. And there it really is a balancing act of like what has truly occurred, what the fears are around that. It's hard to like prescribe a big statement to that one because it's very specific. Also, Rachel, you go.
Well, it's mostly making me just think about, in the legal context, like frontline staff, the unauthorized practice of law dictates a lot of what people can and cannot say. And this is a huge thorny issue for frontline staff. And so I just think most of the issues, this probably isn't actually addressing your question, but most of the things I spend my time thinking about are like, how do we get enough information to clarify the problems that like both the user, so like the self-represented person, and the clerk are experiencing? Because it really is, it's like the lack of information and clear information that people can point to that's causing the majority of the problems, at least in the court issues that we've seen. But Molly has more of the other kind of experience. Yeah. Oh, where do you find information on the Baker framework? I think on the previous slide. Do you want to take a screenshot? This is our debut, Ricardo.
Yeah, this is Rachel Molly's special. This is from us. So this was kind of
made it for FormFest.
Yeah, we made it.
Molly made it. We made it for FormFest though.
And thanks everyone. Wow. Yeah, this was based off of a lot of questions of looking at a form and trying to really call it down to its bare bones to build something beautiful is how I would talk about it eloquently. But no, this is just a culmination of questions from working on these different types of situations over time.
Okay. This session was so great. Thank you. I love the questions shared on the forum user slide. I wonder about the impact of including those questions on, say, a form introduction sheet that would help the folks filling out the form know that there are needed humans on the other side. There are indeed humans on the other side of a form that do care about their, it cut off. I'll have to find that.
Oh, it's in the Q&A side. So I wonder about the impact of including those questions on, say, a form introduction sheet that would help the folks filling out the forms know that there are indeed humans on the other side of a form that do care about their experience. It seems like this sort of research could potentially help restore feelings of power to the person completing the form. Yeah, I'm trying to think of what... I think any sign of care to a person filling out a form like this is great. I am always on the realm of saying the less questions, the better.
Yes.
Or maybe if there's a feedback mechanism, I think that's great. If there is, I think some of form work is about making forms more friendly. There was a whole section of Rapid about how do we make this form feel friendlier. The original Section 8 application, as you can imagine, written in all caps. And someone, when we were working through this form with them, they were like, I feel like I'm getting yelled at every time I work through this form. And so, and we also talk about these forms in terms of like, this might be someone's only interaction. I think you said this once, Rachel, whenever we were talking one time, and I was like, this blew my mind, is this might be someone's only interaction with the government is through a form. And so wondering what that feels like for folks. So I definitely agree with the sentiment of people knowing that there's someone else on the other side of the forum and like that there's people there that are reading.
I saw one person interested in seeing the frontline staff questions, so I'm going to go back to that. What was your experience working with low literacy folks and people with low English? Anything special in the Baker framework for them?
Also, Rachel, if there's any point you wanted, I feel like I'm on a roll.
No,
now. I feel like
roll around, Molly. It's good.
I feel like I'm having some internet, so I'm just talking until I don't have internet. So in my experiences in working with folks, I mean, it was just trying to incorporate plain language. We're trying to make sure that everything was on at least an 8th grade reading level. And we were trying to understand how much of legalese was necessary on, this is for housing forms. Court forms are a whole different section when thinking about legalese. And there's another organization called Transcend that's currently working on plain language translations for these court forums. But I mean, our experience has just been finding ways to incorporate plain language, using visual cues in these forms so people might know where to write in something, where not, has been great. I think in the Baker framework, that's usually for like culling down the types of questions on the forms. Maybe we add in an extra letter. Maybe there's a bakers, then we can add an S
Yeah, what an
for
S.
for something. We'll think of the letter, but that's a great addition.
Thank you for the suggestion. Sometimes agencies, I think this is a long one. Let me find it. Okay. Sometimes agencies can be a bit wary of removing information from forms for fear of being out of compliance with policy, even when policy doesn't necessarily require that. A specific form ask a specific question in a specific way. What have you found to be most effective in getting agencies on board with the goal of making their forms simpler and taking more of the burden on their own staff and systems?
So with again to the rapid forms, what an experience, what a ride it was. So I'm pulling from all of these fun memories. That was also the project I was most intertwined with. But for us, first, what we found to be most effective with getting agencies on board is that we know that people in all of these organizations want people to get this support. We know everyone at HPDs wants people to be housed. And whenever we were able to show the impact of having forms like this for people filling them out, that was really moving for everyone to say, like, okay, how do we make this happen? How do we get people housed? How do we make this more accessible for people? And sometimes we did have so many meetings where we sat down together and we weighed out, like, do we really need this question? And what does that mean if we take it out? What would a self-certification form in here stand for? What would that mean? So there was a lot of just internal feelings meetings, I guess, to talk about our anxieties together. And that was really effective once we were all aligned on this vision that we could foresee of people being able to access housing easier. And I think so. It is an interesting balance of saying, like, maybe staff will go and do this step themselves. And one instance of this is that some PHAs, they have to do like a light background check. And some PHAs actually ask you to list out every single state you've ever lived in. And some PHAs use a nationwide tool to just search. And I just got a recommended session pop up. Such an alert. And so what was I saying? So it was kind of a balance of figuring out what would be the easiest path for staff. And I will say that whenever you have forms that people know how to fill out, that are comfortable filling them out, there's a lot less errors, which actually in turn reduces the burden on staff exponentially, from having to answer questions, from having to send back applications, from having to answer the same question over and over. So we found, at least with the rapid forms, that the balance of labor did not go overwhelmingly into staff. It actually has been evening out into like a smooth bliss. I don't know. That was my wording today. I don't know. So be blissful.
So I think the next session starts. Ashley, do you want to give us some guidance? Should we end now or
Yeah, so I think we are at a time in our session. If you guys want to leave with any closing remarks, I know we also had a few questions in the chat about the possibility to share the slides, but I will hand it over to y'all with some closing remarks, and then we can move towards our last session of the day.
Yeah, I think we would be happy to share slides. Please reach out to us if you have any questions or ideas or thoughts or ways of contributing to the next version of talking about administrative burden and human-centered design. Molly, anything from you?
Thank you all. I mean, it's such an honor to speak at FormFest, and it's so sweet to be a part of the form world, and that there's a lot of people excited about forms. So thanks for coming to our talk. We've been both coming to FormFest for a while now, so it's really sweet to be here with you all, and we appreciate your time.